In a future timeline where Goku and Piccolo die along with all of the other Z fighters. In a future timeline where you're a kid that has to train by yourself for years. In a future timeline where there is no room of spirited time, also known as the hyperbolic time chamber, to train in. In a future timeline when you finally have a training partner, he's a kid and he's weaker than you, so he can't push you. In a future timeline where you only have one arm after losing your other arm in battle. In a future timeline where you were convinced mentally that there are no stages beyond Super Saiyan, so you never seek to go further beyond unlocking your true potential. And in a future timeline where there are two powerful androids that will gang up on you if you ever became a threat. It's pretty easy to see the infinite mountain that Future Gohan had to climb to stand a chance against the androids. For crying out loud, a younger version of him killed a stronger android after absorbing stronger versions of the same androids that he couldn't beat in the future. And in a twist of fate, it's also fitting that in another timeline he also killed this super perfect android with one arm. Future Gohan missed out on two important sets of training that drastically separated him from his present counterpart. Future Gohan didn't train for 3 years with Goku and Piccolo in anticipation for the android threat since no one knew the androids would show up, and as stated by Future Trunks, Goku was the only one that killed King Cole and Frieza in the future. So certain characters would still have trained naturally because it's just in their fighting nature, like Tien, Piccolo, Goku, or Vegeta, but not Gohan, because in the present timeline you can see how difficult it was for Goku to convince Chi-Chi that it was okay for Gohan to train for the android threat, so in the future, with no expected threats, Gohan did little to no training. Then when you remove the Room of Spirit and Time and the ability to train with Goku or Piccolo, his growth was obviously stunted. But despite everything that Future Gohan had going against him, he is far more powerful than fans think he is. In fact, you'd be shocked to learn exactly how strong he is compared to fighters in the present, if we're talking about the anime, of course. Because the manga was brutally honest in their depiction of how weak Future Gohan actually was. For starters, Gohan knocks out Trunks, saying a final goodbye, knowing ahead of time that he has no shot. This is consistent with the Japanese dub of the anime, where Gohan makes it clear that he knows he's not going to survive. But the English dub gave the impression that there was a risk, but it was more so a do-or-die situation instead of a guaranteed acceptance of death. But in the manga, Gohan enters the fight against 17, kicking him in the face similar to the TV special. After some brief dialogue about ripped clothes, 17 remarks how shocked he is that Gohan is still alive. Gohan gives that classic generic "you are going to pay for this" speech, only to realize that 17 used less than half of his power the last time they fought, and that fight resulted in Gohan barely surviving and losing his arm. 17 then charges at Gohan, 18 laughs at Gohan, and Gohan is shocked knowing that all the training he did for over a year didn't make a difference. This is where you insert your imagination of the violence 17 was inflicting on Gohan with those classic "it's too violent for you to see" tropes that are often done in horror films. His death is completely left up to our imagination, which makes it a much darker scene compared to the anime. The end result may be the same with a dead carcass of Gohan being found by Trunks, but we saw the heroic fight that he put up in the anime adaptation. With 18 laughing and 17 letting Gohan know how weak he is, there is no doubt how one-sided this fight was off-screen. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if that one kick Gohan landed was the only hit that landed at all, and he only got it when 17 was off guard. But notice the key difference here. 17 alone fights Gohan, 18 is a spectator. This alone gives us a huge amount of power scaling evidence in itself as compared to the TV special. In both the present and future timelines, we have a recurring pattern with the android. 17 and 18 are a deadly duo when they team up, but they usually fight solo and only team up if they absolutely need to. 17 jumped in to help 18 when the other Dragon Team members ambushed her when fighting against Vegeta. 17 jumped in to also help 18 when she was losing to Future Trunks when he came back to the future to kill both androids. And 18 jumped in to help 17 when Gohan started winning against 17 in the amusement park. Trunks directly states that Gohan is winning, and after 18 ambushes Gohan, she remarks to 17 how he wasn't performing well. 18 also directly participates in Gohan's last stand, teaming up with 17 when there was no need for her to do so in the manga. She directly tells Gohan that she and 17 are going to go all out and will make sure they kill him this time so he doesn't escape again. Now, as a side note, we should also mention that they also team up against Future Trunks when he loses to them as well. But this is where the power scaling gets even more complicated when we add Trunks to the picture. because in the manga, none of the 3 battles that were shown in the history of Trunks were shown at all, including the fight where Gohan lost his arm, when Gohan died, and Trunks' failed attempt at revenge. We didn't see if Trunks fought 2 androids, but when we look at the manga, Trunks talks about them in a plural sense, suggesting that it was both and not just 17. But you also have to understand that this was also partially a retcon as well, because when Trunks originally traveled to the past, he mentions how androids 19 and 20 destroyed his future, which numerically matches android 19 and android 20, who was also Dr. Gero. But you see, what had happened was that Toriyama originally wrote androids 19 and 20 to be the main villains, but his editor Torishima told him that you can't make the arc about a fat clown and an old man, so he then invented androids 17 and 18 to be the main villains. But Torishima came back again and told him that you can't make the arc about juveniles, so he eventually made Cell. This is what happens when visual performance doesn't fully match manga statements, and this is also what happens when the narrative completely shifts from the writer's perspective. Even though canonically the history of Trunks and Trunks the Lone Warrior's side chapter directly tie into the main story, they don't perfectly correlate with the original story's intent and Toriyama's mindset about the arc when Trunks first showed up and killed Frieza. But despite the fact that Trunks performed much worse than Gohan visually in the history of Trunks, his own power scaling suggests that he may have been somewhat relative to Gohan in pure power before he died, but was significantly less skilled as a fighter even compared to Gohan with a one-armed handicap. Bulma notes this as well, as she says that he doesn't stand a chance against the androids and he's a Super Saiyan like Gohan, but it wasn't enough. Now of course Bulma can't sense ki, so you could say she's not a reliable source, but she obviously said this as a narrative tool by Toriyama to help the viewers understand, or readers understand, that being a Super Saiyan isn't enough in both the anime and the manga adaptation. Now Trunks states in the manga and anime after losing to the androids in the present that he could hold his own with them in the future, which visually doesn't add up, but it does show that the androids were a major threat as a duo, but individually the threat wasn't as bad in the anime. All of this is to say that if the androids gang up on you, it really means something. So rewinding back to Gohan, we have 2 androids going all out against Gohan, which definitely helps increase his power scaling in this scenario. But let's rewind back to the original fight in the amusement park. We can see that the TV special takes direct references from the manga. Similar to the manga, Gohan fights 17 alone and 18 doesn't participate. The anime emphasized this even deeper, as 18 doesn't even spectate. You can see her enjoying herself carefree as she's having fun in the amusement park as Gohan is fighting 17. What does this tell you? In previous encounters between Gohan and 17, the fight was so one-sided that she had no need to jump in. To the androids, Gohan is the only person left on Earth who can fight them since they killed all of the other warriors years ago, so for her to jump in would be overkill. Now when you take a deeper look at 18, besides her direct statement we mentioned earlier about 17 struggling when she does jump in, look at how serious her facial expression changed as Gohan started to win. This clearly indicated that this was not expected, and she then made the decision to jump in and fight him with 17. But here is a major indication of change. When the fight starts off, Gohan is losing and 18 shows no interest in jumping in since this was expected. As soon as Gohan starts to turn the tide of the battle, 18 jumps in and Gohan quickly gets overwhelmed by both androids, which prompted Trunks to enter the fight and try to save him. Now let's keep in mind that the whole "I used half my power" statement is manga exclusive, as 17 only said that in the manga. However, when 18 says "we will go full power to make sure you don't survive," this suggests a similar thing, as it suggests that the androids weren't going at 100% in the previous fight in the amusement park, but the fact that 2 of them would go at 100% in the second fight versus Gohan significantly increases the difficulty and the power scaling for Gohan overall. This is how we know for sure that Gohan got stronger between the first and last fight that we see him have against the androids, even with the one-armed handicap. Even though he eventually died in one fight versus getting injured and losing an arm in the other fight, take this into account. Gohan performed better against the androids trying harder versus performing worse when the androids tried less. As soon as 18 jumped in the first fight, Gohan stood no chance and it was clear. In the second fight, they jumped him from the start and he held his own. Now, the manga never shows the amusement park battle, but the TV special filled in details for an implied battle. In the manga, Trunks mentions how Gohan could have kept his arm if the sensu plant hadn't died out, implying that his arm was so badly damaged that it was amputated, unless you believe sensu beans can completely replace limbs. Either way, Gohan remarks on how lucky he was to make it out alive, and when he challenges 17, even 17 was shocked that Gohan was alive after a year had passed. But here's where we get a major manga and anime difference. The TV special shows Gohan injured and then cuts to him training with Trunks later on. There is no indication of how much time passed from the time Gohan got injured to when he started to train with Trunks again. This is where we can really scale the major power scaling difference. Gohan had over a year to train and stood no chance against one android in the manga. In the TV special, he recovers shortly after a brief amount of time, and with one arm he does better against two androids fighting at full power. This is a scenario where you could imply that with some training combined with a theoretical Zenkai boost that Gohan would have been stronger than what he was before, but this was at a point in Dragon Ball history where Zenkai boosts weren't always taken into account or directly referenced. It was a theoretical concept that we can respect, but it wasn't always directly referenced, and this is a perfect example of it. Either way, we know for clear evidence based off of performances that Gohan was definitely stronger in the second fight than he was in the first fight. Now, I made a video short about this, but there is one extremely convincing argument that indicates exactly how strong Future Gohan was, and this is the beam clash that he had against the androids. This one brief scene scales Future Gohan even further beyond what I already said in this video to this point. Let's break it down. We have two androids fully powered up combining their energy into a blast against Gohan with one arm. First, we must scale androids 17 and 18. The Dr. Jerome manga guide states that 17 is stronger than 18 directly, but visual evidence in Dragon Ball Z, especially the history of Trunks, suggests that the gap isn't massive. Now, if you count Dragon Ball Super and if you count Dragon Ball GT, the gap between 17 and 18 is massive. 17 easily overpowers 18 when he fought her in Dragon Ball GT in their fight over Krillin, and in Dragon Ball Super he fights on par with the Super Saiyan Blue and stronger characters in the Tournament of Power. It also appears that Android 17's Android Barrier is an exclusive technique to him that 18 doesn't use, even though she was shown doing the Android Barrier in video games, but obviously we can't count that. So it's safe to say that in the history of Trunks that they are somewhat relative even if 17 is stronger. That's why I've always made a comparison to Goten and Trunks. And as opposed to that, I have to point this out as I said in my short. If you have any doubts that the androids were actually trying against Gohan, just look at their facial expressions when they were engaging in this beam clash. Does it look like they were holding back? Now let's factor in Trunks' statement that the future androids were weaker than the present androids. But here's the crazy part. If we over-exaggerated how much stronger the present androids were and said that they were twice as strong as the future androids, that means Future Gohan displayed a level of power in this scene that rivals Piccolo fused with Kami versus Android 17. It's simple math if you take 17 and 18 and say they are relative and combine their energy together. But here's where it gets even crazier. The smaller the difference between the future androids and the present androids actually makes Future Gohan even stronger when you power scale it. It sounds crazy, but hear me out. I'll say it again. The smaller the gap, the closer they are to the present androids in power. The closer they are to the present androids in power means that he overpowered a much stronger combined energy. To illustrate this, if we were to say that the future androids were 50% the strength of the present androids, that means that he displayed a level of power on the scale of Android 17 versus fused Piccolo, as we said before. But if we were to say that the future androids are 75% as strong as the present androids, now they are closer to the present androids in power, which means Gohan overpowered a much stronger combined energy force. Now of course, if Gohan was this powerful narratively, this creates a contradiction when Trunks goes back in time, because if Trunks knew how strong Gohan was before he died, and felt he was relative to Gohan when he chose to fight the androids in revenge, he shouldn't have been that impressed when he saw Goku transform and block his sword. This is a classic example of Dragon Ball's visual performances not matching the narrative of the show itself. And even though this is a minor scene, I must say that visually this is a great comparison to look at Future Gohan versus the present version of Gohan. Now as a side note, I've observed that several Dragon Ball fans find a unique parallel between the beam clash Future Gohan had against the androids to Super Saiyan 2 Gohan versus Super Perfect Cell. Both have one arm and are using a Kamehameha. Now of course Future Gohan doesn't directly say Kamehameha, but it's clearly implied visually that he's using this to overpower both androids, who would be absorbed into a stronger android in the present timeline. Now to be technical, of course when Gohan Gohan killed Cell, neither android was still absorbed by Cell since 17 died when he self-destructed, and 18 was knocked out of Cell earlier by Gohan. But in terms of video production, the TV special was actually released on February 24th of 1993, and at the time the manga was on chapter 411, which was released on February 23rd of 1993. So the manga chapter was released a day prior to this TV special airing. Now the thing that you have to understand about this is that obviously the TV special doesn't take 5 minutes to make. It was in production prior to this, and because of this, it's actually an error to think that the TV special was inspired by what happened in the manga with Gohan killing Cell with the father-son Kamehameha, or what happened in the anime, because the TV special was actually released prior to what happened even in the manga. So if anything was inspired by anything, the manga and the anime would have been inspired by the TV special and not the other way around. Now in the manga, Gohan states that he wishes he was as strong as Goku before he died. But this isn't Yardrat Goku that Gohan is referring to, as fans often confuse. This Goku is in a weird limbo state of power. This is a Goku 3 years after he killed Frieza and King Cold, and I think the inconsistency comes with the fact that many fans may believe that Goku died right after he got the heart virus, but no, Yardrat Goku is not the same as the Goku Gohan's referring to, because Goku was alive for an extra 3 years, and then he got the heart virus, and then he died, and then more time passed, and then the android showed up, and that's when everything went to hell. So this Goku, once again, is 3 years after he killed Frieza and King Cold. That is the last version of Goku that Future Gohan would have in his mind. This version of Goku would always train, as we always assume, as Goku always trains, so he would be stronger than the Yardrat Goku that came to Earth and killed Frieza and King Cold, but he would be weaker than what he would be in the present timeline if he was fully healthy and didn't get the heart virus, because this Goku would have been aware that the androids were going to show up, and he would have trained even harder, and he would have made sure that also Gohan and Piccolo were stronger. And as a result of it, this Goku is in between. He's not as strong as a fully healthy Goku in the present timeline, but he's also stronger than Goku, which would be the same Goku that had that brief sparring match with Trunks where he was blocking his sword. But the TV special is slightly different in Gohan referring to his dad's power. When Gohan was having dinner with Trunks and Bulma, Bulma remarks as to how much he looks like his father, especially with the outfit he was wearing. Gohan remarks that he wishes he was as strong as his dad before he died. So we have a power scaling continuity era of Gohan admitting his father was stronger than him, even though visual evidence shows that in the TV special he would have been far stronger than his father and any Z warrior would be for years. And you also have to remember something else too. Gohan is saying this before he fights the androids the first time in the amusement park, which clearly opens the door for him surpassing his father later on when he was much stronger when he fought them with one arm. But the general point is, in Gohan's mind, he doesn't feel he's as strong as his father even before the amusement park battle, which would make sense narratively, but visually, based off of performances, it doesn't make sense. And let me emphasize once again that Gohan is only this strong in the TV special because the manga version of him was far more consistent with how weak he should be relative to the androids. Now, apart from the manga and the TV special, the third depiction of Future Gohan takes place in episode 164 called A Future in Despair, Trunks the Man Who Lived Through Hell in Japanese, and Ghost from Tomorrow in English. This episode included original filler flashbacks of what happened in Trunks' timeline. Chronologically, this filler was produced prior to the history of Trunks being released, but after the manga side chapter, which explains why certain details were interpreted differently. The battle depicted here serves as a prototype to the fight that Gohan and Trunks had versus the androids in the amusement park for the TV special, as you can see various ideas that were floating around by the production team. The first major difference is that Gohan has 2 arms, and the second difference is the fact that Gohan fights alongside Trunks against the androids the entire time. This filler scene was a brief way for Trunks to narrate everything that happened in his future concluded in one battle. Trunks states that in time Gohan died, meaning that there was more to be seen from what they briefly showed in this filler episode, but it obviously wasn't expanded into since it was just a quick scene to give us an idea of what happened in Trunks' future, because the TV special would expand on this in the future. But because there isn't a separate fight of Gohan being injured and a second fight of Gohan dying, the power scaling changes drastically here. To begin, you can see a direct side-by-side inspiration in the history of Trunks from this filler battle. The fight starts off almost exactly the same. Gohan and Trunks fly over to the androids. One android, in this specific case Android 18 and not Android 17, launches a blast at Gohan, which he avoids, and then he turns into a Super Saiyan in the air. And to give you some more inspirations, we also have a moment where Trunks is in trouble against Android 18, and Gohan jumps in to save Trunks as he hits her off guard the same way he did in the TV special. And we also have a moment where the androids are destroying everything and Gohan and Trunks are hiding, similar to when Trunks was knocked out and Gohan had to save him as he was hiding from both androids. But in terms of direct power scaling, this Future Gohan sits in between the manga and the TV special, because Gohan starts off the fight by getting wrecked by 18 alone with android 17 as a spectator this time. And remember what we said before about the manga saying that 17 is the stronger android. But after this, Trunks jumps in to help and cuts some of 18's hair off. Let's also point out a quick detail that Trunks is fighting with a sword from the time he was younger as opposed to him using it when he was older. But we have a major difference. In the TV special, both androids teamed up on Gohan when Trunks jumped in, but here he is losing to 18 alone. 17 only got involved when they both attacked 18. But the key thing about this fight is that Gohan attacks both androids with a Masenko and it seemingly does some damage when they're off guard. But because Gohan was only able to land surprise attacks on the androids and he failed to land any direct hits like he did in the TV special, it's clear that Gohan from this episode of filler is not as strong as he was in the TV special. But we do have one major consistency from the TV special, the filler episode, and the manga, and this is the fact that when Gohan was hiding with Trunks, he acknowledges that he wasn't as strong as his father, showing us that in all three depictions, Gohan makes it clear that he doesn't see himself as strong as his dad was before he died. So here's how we would power scale the hierarchy of the 5 Future Gohans in terms of power scaling. The manga version of Future Gohan, in the implied off-screen battle where his arm was injured and he barely escaped, which was explained in the manga, is the weakest version of Future Gohan, even if we never saw him. This is because it's stated that Gohan trained for over a year, which means the version of Future Gohan that kicks 17 off guard is stronger than what he was a year ago, even with a one-armed handicap, because this version of Gohan felt that he could put up a better fight than he did a year before, even if he knew he was going to die. Meaning the Gohan that got killed by 17 alone would be the second weakest. Now, in terms of the third weakest, or you could also say the third strongest, since we're ranking it both from bottom to top or top to bottom, would be Gohan from Ghost from Tomorrow. And the key reason here is because he was able to do some damage on the androids, but he's clearly weaker than both androids individually. The Future Gohan in the TV special's amusement park started to win against 17 alone before 18 jumped in, but in Ghost from Tomorrow, Gohan was getting wrecked by 18 from the start and only got lucky hits. For those exact reasons, that's why Gohan in the amusement park in the TV special would be the second strongest out of all 5 versions, but because 18 directly stated that they would go all out against Gohan the second time we saw them fight, that implies that they didn't go all out against him in the amusement park, which ultimately means because Gohan fought them off even better in his last stand with a one-armed handicap, that shows that he would have to be the strongest out of all 5 Future Gohans, ranking all 5 with Gohan's last stand being the strongest version of Future Gohan in the TV special, Gohan in the amusement park being the second strongest, Gohan from Ghost from Tomorrow being the third strongest or third weakest if you want to say that, the Future Gohan that lost to Android 17 after training for a year is the second weakest, and last but not least, the Future Gohan in the implied off-screen battle where his arm got injured and he barely escaped would be the weakest. But remember, this is a case where visual performances don't always match the narrative. Gohan acknowledges that Goku is stronger than him in all 3 cases, even if the visuals didn't fit the narrative and the retcon that took place as we mentioned earlier. Now, as a post-edit, I must shout out Vegito1089, who made a strong point about Future Gohan. In the manga and Japanese dub, when Gohan knocks out Trunks as a final farewell, he knows for sure that he's going to die against the androids, and his statements back it up completely. But if you look at the TV special, when the androids were about to finish him off, you can see Gohan flying away to escape. He no longer had any interest in fighting the androids. This suggests that he probably felt if he survived and trained more that he actually stood a chance in the future, showing that he performed much better in his mind than he originally thought that he could when he entered this battle, proving to himself that surviving would have been the better outcome instead of going into a battle he knew he couldn't win. This takes us to future Vegeta. Without the foreknowledge of the upcoming android threat, he would still train since it's in his character to do so, but not to the extreme extent that he did in the present timeline. Remember, the present version of Vegeta even surpassed Goku, as Piccolo directly acknowledges this, and Piccolo trained with Goku for 3 years, so he knew exactly how strong Goku was. When you compare this to Future Gohan not only survived survive the androids, but he fights them much better than Future Vegeta did in the extremely brief moments that we saw of him losing to 17 in the TV special and him getting wrecked in Ghost from Tomorrow. Now in Dragon Ball Super Side Chapter, Vegeta was never shown as a Super Saiyan, but it could also be one of those cases where he was knocked out of it. And when we look at the original manga, nothing was ever shown of Future Vegeta, so his fate was left up to our imagination and whether or not he ever turned into a Super Saiyan. Now as a post-edit, I should point out that Future Vegeta's power scaling is actually relative to Future Gohan's power scaling in the manga, and here's why. When we look at Vegeta in the TV special and also in Ghost from Tomorrow, Android 17 easily defeats him by himself, and when we look at the fact that Android 17 defeated Future Gohan in the manga where he was holding back in the first fight and didn't need 18's help, that shows that Future Gohan was much weaker and was relative to Future Vegeta, which would make it a lot more clear that Future Goku was stronger than both of them. This brings up Piccolo. Even though he got much stronger after fusing with Kami, Piccolo was only able to gain an advantage on Imperfect Cell before absorbing enough humans to challenge the androids, and he was also only able to fight on par with Android 17 alone. This is only because the androids fought fair, because if 18 jumped in like she did with 17 in the TV special, Piccolo would have been dead before Cell even showed up. Now of course the present androids are stronger than the future ones, but Gohan held his own against two future androids and overpowered them in that beam clash where they combine their energy. But to make an even stronger case for Future Gohan, Dat Bird points out in one of his YouTube shorts that the Daishenzu states the future androids were only somewhat weaker than the present androids. And if that's the case, then that once again means that Future Gohan overpowered much stronger androids than we underestimate. Future Trunks also proved that you have to be significantly more powerful than both androids to an extreme extent to conquer their double teaming advantage. That's why teaming up on him in the future timeline didn't matter after all of the training he did in the present. So of course Future Gohan is much weaker than he would be in the present, but he basically surpassed every single adult character that was stronger than him as a kid by himself with a much weaker training partner. In the manga, Gohan trained with the Super Saiyan Kid Trunks while he was in his base form. In the TV special, he never even got to train with the Super Saiyan Kid Trunks because he died before Trunks unlocked Super Saiyan. So there was no one to push him into being stronger, and yet he passed all of the adults, including a Super Saiyan Vegeta and Piccolo without fusing with Kami. And of course you could say Goku would have still been stronger than him, but visual evidence tells us otherwise, even if the narrative says so. Now when compared to the present, if we use the TV specials version, then Gohan is much stronger visually than the entire Dragon Team up until the point when they started to fight the stronger present androids in Cell. Narratively, of course it doesn't make sense once again, but visually based off of power scaling, Future Gohan was much stronger than everybody. The truth of all of this is that he was significantly overpowered in the TV special to make himself die in a more heroic and tragic way. The manga and filler episodes made it clear that Trunks and Gohan stood no chance against the androids, but the TV special gave viewers the idea that with more time and better circumstances like having two arms, that Gohan and eventually Trunks could have surpassed both of them over time, especially if the TV special version of Future Trunks could turn Super Saiyan like he did in the manga. The way Toriyama originally wrote the side chapter was brutally honest, with virtually no hope of ever surpassing the androids without an extreme change like going back to the past with the time machine. He needed to explain in a few pages how terrifying the androids were, and he did so effectively. But for entertainment purposes, and in order to give Future Gohan a proper farewell as a hero, it was clear that Yamaguchi, Koyama, Nishio, and Toda all overpowered Gohan to have a greater effect to make the fight more competitive. And to prove to you that their plan worked, just look at how many people are still talking about Future Gohan's last stand, like this video you just finished. Thanks for watching.